Dear friends, Christ our Lord is risen. He has conquered sin and death. He has fulfilled his promise. And this day, this Easter day, we celebrate with great joy Christ's covenant with us. But on this glorious day, in this magnificent place, this joy is perhaps easy to come by. But think with me for a moment of being with Mary Magdalene, with Simon Peter and John, that first Easter morning, where the fulfillment of God's promise was not as certain, where the disciples did not necessarily know the end of the story. The past 3 days, they watched the one in whom they placed all their hope, all their trust, all their faith be paraded in front of a court, be mocked and scourged, be paraded through streets full of jeering crowds. And yes, at the foot of the cross, they saw their friend, the one in whom they hoped, be put to death. How confusing it must have been, unsettling and unsure for them who had walked with Jesus to now be so uncertain as to what his promise might keep. How anguished, how confused they must have been that first Easter morning, wanting to trust in the promise of their friend, but having every shred of physical evidence suggest otherwise. How deep their joy must have been when they came to the realization that even in the face of death itself, even in the midst of the most cruel mockery and scorn, God kept his promise. Jesus came to save. Jesus rose from the dead to bring about all that he had spoken of, the fullness of his kingdom, the fullness of his love. And so while it perhaps is easy for us on this day to celebrate that promise with great hope, we're reminded by the story of that first resurrection morn that Christ's promise is made most abundantly clear. Our hope is made most fully known, not necessarily in these grand occasions where the hope is easy to come by, but in those moments and places of fear, of anxiety, of confusion. That yes, this one day a year we celebrate our Lord's triumph over sin and death. But that triumph marks the character not of one day, but of every single moment of our life. We are an Easter people. And even when the days are dark and cold, even when our life is less tidy than we would like it to be, even when all the world seems to be far from perfection, far from grace, far from love, the truth of this day, the fulfillment of this promise, will always be true. That God has always given himself, always gives himself to us, so that we might have life, and life eternal. So perhaps, friends, what the glory of this day invites us to consider is how we live our Easter faith, how we live our Easter reality the other 364 days of the year. How do we, as people confident in the promise of God, bring the joy and faith and trust of this morning into the places in our world and our life that are perhaps less glorious, less glamorous, less magnificent? Does the faith that shapes us this morning insert itself into our day-to-day existence? Are we cognizant of God's promise and love for us every morning when we wake up? Do we trust in his fidelity in those moments when we're called to make tough decisions? Do we trust in his promise to shape the very character of who we are in faith and discipleship? How is it, friends, that you and I bring the joy of this day, this Easter day, to the world around us, especially to places where love seems hard to come by, where the darkness seems great, where hope seems futile? Even there, even in those darkest, deepest places of our lives and our world, the triumph of this day still reigns. The triumph of God's promise is still true. The triumph of God's love still preeminent. Yes, Christ is risen today, but he is risen always. And may the joy of this day shape every thought and every action of our lives, every single day in the life to come, so that we might share and live the glory of this triumph forever in the kingdom of heaven.